Okay, looks like we're doing pretty well on getting everybody in that is interested in learning more about PA 232. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm Brian Lilly, president of the Michigan Wine Collaborative. Many of you I'm certain to have met before, and many of you, it seems that we have new interests, and I'm glad that you're interested in this as well. Thanks for joining us today. Um, we have some very special guests that are dedicating 1 hour of their time to us. So I want to make sure that this meeting is very efficient and respect and being sensitive to our guests' time. We have Diane Smith from Michigan Apples, and we have Jamie Clover, Jamie Clover Adams from Michigan Asparagus. Thanks for joining us today. So on this topic is a very important topic of a checkoff program, PA 232, which is Public Act 232. To keep things efficient and organized, I ask that everyone save their questions to the end. And if you want to submit a question, I will answer those who have entered their interest in the chat, and I will call on people in order of the chat if there are questions that are outstanding. I'm sure that there's a lot more content than we have time today, but in order to, like I said, keep the interest of our guests' time in order, we'll cover as much as we can, and I apologize in advance if we don't get to everyone's question today. But we will certainly be open to receiving further questions if they are outstanding and find answers for you. So let us begin. Diane, Jamie, thanks for coming today. I think where we want to start today is kind of just get an overview for those of us that are not familiar with what a PA 232 program is. And we asked both of you, both of your industries to join us today because I believe that both of you are recipients of a PA 232 program. And so what I'd like to do is kind of take turns, and I won't have any specific order here other than the order of my screen. But let's start with the very simple question of what is a PA 232 program? Diane, you want to kind of explain that for us?
Sure, I can do that. And Jamie obviously was a past director of Michigan Department of Agriculture, so she probably can get quite, much more technical in her description of it. But Public Act 232, so it allows for, industries to collectively work to, as one towards, their end goal, whatever that might be. Each program kind of does their something a little bit different. For Michigan Apples, obviously we use that for research, marketing, and education. But it allows us to basically the growers to tax themselves, for lack of a better word, assessments, and we collect those, and then we do the work based on input from our board, which is all growers for Michigan Apple Committee. And we also, I think we'll probably get into it more. There are some things we can and cannot do with PA 232s. So, and we can probably answer that maybe a little bit later, but yeah, that's kind of just a broad overview. I don't know, Jamie, do you want to get more detailed on, the legislative side of it and everything?
Yeah, I think, technically the statute was created in 1965, so it's been around a long time. It sets up broad parameters for how you go about establishing a program if you'd like to do that. When I was director, blueberries went through this process as well as tree fruit. And so it is a very grower-driven process. The growers come together, whoever's interested, they create an advisory board that then goes out and gets petition signatures. They work with the department on the language. Once that happens, then they work together on putting together a we're going to call it a draft program. And that lays out everything, what the focus is going to be, how you're going to pick your board members, how you're going to operate, what the assessment rate or the high, the up to assessment rate might be. And then you come back to the department and then there's a vote. And if the vote passes, well, then you move forward. If it doesn't, you don't. But as Diane said, this is really a grower-driven process. And they have, decided to collectively come together and work together to benefit their part of, in our case, in the asparagus industry, our part, the grower part of the industry. And I think the other thing about the program that's unique and is good, and keeps the program on point, is the growers vote every 5 years. So if you're not doing what your growers want you to do, if the board's not listening to the growers, you won't be here. It's that simple. And so they're very attuned to what their colleagues want and need from the program, what they'd like to see. And so I think that grower vote is a really good thing about the law. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Yeah, so maybe we can go a little bit deeper into that piece now. I know there's a certain percentage that represents a certain percentage. I think that number is 51% of 51% of the acres. Is that correct?
On the 5-year vote?
Correct.
Correct. You have to have a majority of the growers, and then you have to have a majority of the volume. So like when asparagus had, we had a vote last year, we had 93% of the voters or growers voted yes, and 98% of the pounds voted yes. And so then we continue. But if it had been less than that in either one of those categories, then we would not have continued.
Okay, so it is 2 requirements: a majority of the growers and a majority of the acres represented. But you said pounds. Maybe that there's a.
Yeah, it depends. It depends on how you're set up. Ours is
okay.
On the volume. You could be set up on acres, but yeah, could be either. I think.
Seems like there's a correlation. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. So maybe Diane or Jamie, you could touch on a little bit of, maybe Jamie can touch on what this type of program can legally be used for, and then maybe Diane can touch on what you use it for actually.
Yep. So the statute, like I said, lays out the broad parameters. And I think when they wrote this in the 60s, they did a good job of kind of not getting too specific. So they provided a big umbrella for then growers to be creative about what kinds of things they wanted to do. So advertising and promotion, market development, research that's designed to improve agricultural commodities or develop new ones. And then one that, Diane, I don't think anybody does this, but it is in there, that you can establish standards for your commodity and or inspection and grading. And then you can also address surplus. Now, that was written in 1965. So a lot has changed in agriculture since then, but it talked this providing a sufficient portion. Like for my industry, it probably wouldn't work because, we're this much of a global market in asparagus. And so it uses those provisions, but they're in there.
Yeah, I don't think that anybody does. I know that at one point in the apple industry, when I was here, we were trying to establish some grades and standards for Honeycrisp, and that meeting went horribly wrong. So we wouldn't plan on doing that again anytime soon. So Brian, you want me to cover kind of maybe what Michigan Apple Committee does?
Yeah, why don't we start there? That sounds good. Thank you. Okay,
so Michigan Apple Committee, and we had our vote last year as well, and we made changes to our program at that time. So prior to that, so going back to the 1930s, the Michigan State Apple Commission was formed. And then in the 60s, when this program came about, our growers converted over into the PA 232 program. So Michigan apples this last year, what we eliminated on our end was retail. We had been working quite closely with retailers on, placement of apples, discounting, doing demos, ads, whatever might, to move the volume of apples, fresh apples through the system. Unfortunately, the retailers were also charging our fresh sales organizations in the same way. So there was essentially kind of a double dip going on that was coming out of grower pockets. So we chose to, we had a lot of meetings with growers and with our shipper community and made the decision that we would in turn take a step back from retail. And we lowered our assessments in the process. As all new programs, as Jamie said, the up to assessment rate has been kind of worked into all new programs, and older programs like ours didn't have that language for ours. So we had to put, place that language in our last vote so that we would have that flexibility of our board to be able to lower the assessments. So now our main focus is, of course, consumer education, public relations, that type of stuff. We do a lot of education on policy and issues that face our industry. And then we also have a set aside part of our assessment that goes to our national organization. And so we also have another level of our assessments that goes to research. So we kind of have 3 different areas that we're working in utilizing grower dollars. I want to say again, it's important to note that we understand these are grower dollars. We have a grower board. We have advisors to our board that are from the fresh shipper and the process community. However, they don't have a vote on our board. Our board member are strictly growers. They make decisions on how their money is spent. And in their, various regions throughout the state, they're having conversations with their neighbors and making sure that everybody understands the program. So we make sure that we're, very cognizant of that. And I'm sure Jamie would say the same. We're very careful with grower dollars, and we don't want to collect more than we need to. So that's first and foremost. So we do a lot of social programs, social media, trying more digital campaigns. We do a lot with geofencing, that type of stuff to try to reach consumers in a different way, because consumption is a huge issue for our industry. And we need all hands on deck working on that. We have a lot of apples being produced, a lot of it out west, but Michigan is the #2 producer of apples in the US, and so we have quite a few here. Another area that's important for us is, export markets and making sure that we also have those available. So we do still do work in that area, even though we're not working with the Meijers and the Walmarts anymore on the retail side. So, yeah, we have quite a full bucket, but we do have less staff now as well with our program change. We're a little bit leaner and meaner. So we're going after things a little bit more aggressively with a smaller staff. And, I think finding that sweet spot of where you need to be on your collection side is really important, and doing that up to language, making sure that you have the ability to raise it if you need to, if you have an issue, God forbid, we still have growers that talk about LR. And what if something like that were to happen again, and we need to be able, to communicate and, do some sort of campaign or whatever that might happen. So we have the ability to increase if there was some sort of issue that we really needed to address, but also we have the ability to lower that assessment and, in times when we don't need the extra funds. So I think that those are the 2 things. I think, another thing from our perspective, there are things that we cannot do. And, like we cannot lobby. We are not allowed to lobby at all. Now, all of our organizations, I believe all of us, have also a 501c6. We have an additional organization that I don't lobby, because we have a national organization that does that, but it allows us to do things that maybe a call of action to growers or things like that, that we wouldn't be able to do as a 232 program. We can have our separate board, that is the Michigan Apple Association, as a 501c6, make those decisions. So, and that is a completely voluntary organization, doesn't receive any funds from Michigan Apple Committee, has separate books, separate audit, separate everything, and board included. So we keep everything very clean and separate from each other. So there are options where you can't. We also have used MAA for grants. There are some grant programs that Michigan Apple Committee has not been in the past eligible for, based on our IRS status and how we're set up as a state organization. That's always been kind of a challenge. It's worked itself out now, and we're not having those limitations anymore, but it has in the past allowed us to be able to do use that, that separate organization for those types of things. Jamie, did you want to?
I would add too, Brian, that we too have lowered our assessment. When I came on board 3 years ago, they had just done it. And we went down 1/4 cent, I believe. But again, it was, things are tight out for our growers. We had, through good stewardship of grower dollars, built up quite a bit of money in our bank account. And so the board felt that it was prudent to reduce those amounts. Unlike Diane, we don't have a national organization, and so we're going in the opposite direction. So we have started this last couple of years pretty large for our industry, pretty large promotional campaigns with grocers for fresh. Again, trying to move volume and get them to commit to carrying Michigan asparagus as opposed to imported asparagus. So we've done that. And then I think the other benefit of this is that when you have an organization that represents all growers, you can leverage those dollars for production research grants. So I also run the Michigan Carrot Committee, which is another 232. It was started in the 80s. We only have 14 growers. They had probably 75 growers back in the 80s, but the growers that are still here support it because we only bring in $20,000 worth of assessments every year, but we have about $90,000 in the bank, and it allows us to leverage, especially crop block grants, to get research done. And it allows us to respond. 2 years ago, I think, it was before I came. So 3 years ago, Congress had a big hearing on heavy metals in baby food. Many of my growers supply Gerber. It was a big issue. And we were able to use, because we were a group, we got a specialty crop block grant, and we were able to do research on heavy metals in carrots. They were able to leverage that into USDA and NIFA grants, a couple $1 million to look at this issue. And then we've leveraged those research findings for more. So our little bit of money, my time managing those grants, got a huge benefit for my carrot growers. We've done that as well with aspergillosis, which is a disease of carrots that makes them unmarketable. And we're able to work with MSU and been able to use grants and used a little bit of our money to leverage. And now we have a system where they test the leafhoppers. If they put out the infectivity amount, and then the growers make decisions about how much pesticides they put on to control. And so they're saving money. And so my growers view on the carrot side a lot that this is an investment they are making into their operations because of that focus on research.
I think Jamie
that's
really
go ahead.
good. Oh, I was just going to say, Jamie made a really good point there. We, as a commodity group, because we do have this group, we have a seat at a table. We are the people who are recognized as, hey, if we need to talk to somebody from the apple industry, we're going to call Michigan Apple Committee. If we need something on asparagus and carrots, we're going to call Jamie. That gets us a seat at the table. And it's not just, downtown Lansing, it's MSU, it's, federal things. I mean, I'm sure Jamie got an email today too, yesterday about, we have a call with Debbie Stabenow this afternoon about Farm Bill. Those types of things weren't happening. And I will say Blueberry wasn't having a seat at the table prior to their program. And that's a pretty big industry in the state for not to, not have a go-to when those issues come up. So that's just another thing that I think is a really key point.
Yeah, I agree. That's something that this is now our third town hall that we're conducting, and that seems to be a recurring theme, is that it's not the expectation to support the entire industry with this assessment. It's more of talking to, for example, people at legislature to say we've got skin in the game, so it opens doors for us to find other methods to provide for the needs that we seek. So thanks for commenting on it. It's a very important piece.
I mean, that is really important, Brian. Michigan Tree Fruit Commission is one of the newer groups, and that's part of Apple's. And prior to that, we had research stations that were going to be closed because of lack of funding and infrastructure. So the Michigan Tree Fruit Commission came together, which is apples, cherries, peaches, and plums, and have assessed themselves to strictly do that. They're, updating infrastructure on research stations so that they can make sure that the research we're funding as individual groups can continue to happen in those, key areas on those blocks of apples or whatever that we've already put money into. So, that's another kind of key thing for us.
One of the things you kind of touched on already was when I started this routine by having several conversations, and then of course, Diane, you were present at our first meeting that we had in January. One of the sensitive topics is that we are putting assessments on the lowest margin of the supply chain, and I wonder if any of your industries, or if you've heard of other industries, use creative ways to collect that. And what I mean by that is, some examples might be pass-through tax, where if the farmer is being assessed per tonnage for wine grapes, then that particular assessment is then passed on to the producer that's buying those grapes. Is that a fair way to look at it, or is there any legalities that we should know about why it can't be that way?
So what, Brian, you're saying, like, if with wine grapes, if you were, I don't know how much what do you sell them for? Let's say they cost $1.
Yeah.
And when you sold them to the winemaker, you would say, well, I'm going to charge you, I need $1.10 because of my, I don't know of anybody that does that. I don't know why you couldn't do it legally. But at least my growers are price takers, and they don't tell their packers, processors, or the grocery store. The grocery store tells them. And, when I think about this, it's kind of like the grower is always the person that gets screwed over. They're always the one, it rolls downhill to them. And so by, taxing yourself, you control what that money goes for, instead of other organizations where I have seen where processors have a lot more voice and the growers get screwed because they look out for themselves. And so to me, this is a way that they can empower themselves to position issues, to speak on their own behalf from their perspective. And I do have a couple growers on my board that are grower shippers. They grow and they pack. So they bring a nice perspective, but they are growers. And that's how they look at the world. But no, there is no legal reason, if you have that leverage in your marketplace, why you couldn't tack that on as a cost. And here's how much I think I need to get.
Yeah.
But your point again is definitely that because you have that seat at the table, that you can certainly dictate how that assessment happens. Yeah.
You decide how much it is, and you decide what's done with it. I give an example. So our fresh promotion that we're doing, this second year we've done it, I had brokers come to me last year, when I went out to them and said, hey, can you share the names of your buyers so that we can contact them? And they're like, well, just give the money to us. And we're like, the grower said, no, we're not going to do that. And so we used our marketing agency to work directly with Meyer, Save-A-Lot, Aldi, Publix, whoever we're working with. We're working directly with them. And it's an add-on to what the brokers are already working with them on promotions as well. So they did want the money, and the growers said no. They could have said yes. I mean, that was my recommendation as staff to them. It's like, put it out as a grant and let them, tell you what they're going to do with it, and then let them do the work. But the growers didn't want to do that, so we didn't do it that way.
Brian, may I interject here?
Tom, if you don't mind, I'd like to just kind of get through 2 more points, and then we'll open it up for
Okay.
full discussion. Thank you. Diane, is there anything that you wanted to add to that? I am sorry for interrupting you.
Oh, no, that's fine. I would agree with what Jamie said. I have seen boards as well that are controlled maybe by fresh shippers or processors, and it is a different feel, and it's a whole different game of what's happening there. And that's why I really do like the fact that from the perspective of this program, it's completely run by growers. Yeah, they have so much more control, and then they feel like, I think they have a little bit more control over even the fresh and the processed side by being able to, have a say in how those dollars are spent. So I would really strongly recommend that if this program does go through, that you guys make sure that you do have those reps representing on your board, so you have their feedback to the board, but that the growers are really the ones making the decisions.
One of another point that was brought up to me in discussion was that the assessment, if it's based on something like tonnage or acres, that you're going to have the larger business owners or farmers, for this case, are going to support most of the industry with this particular mechanism. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, they do. Say that, obviously I'm not sure how, the wine industry, the wine grape industry is set up, but we are all, family farms, and we do have larger growers and smaller growers, but they all have a voice. So nobody knows what grower A is paying into our program versus grower B. The only ones that know that are those growers. So in our, from our perspective and our board's perspective, everybody has a voice. And, one of my largest growers is the chair of my board, and he's adamant that smaller growers have to be heard at all times. And I think that's a key when you're placing your board. You have to make sure that they understand that this is for the good of the industry, not their personal operation. And a lot of times that is really difficult for some people because they do wear that hat of how is this going to help me and what we're doing. And that is important, but they do really need to be looking out for everybody in the industry. So that would be my 2 cents on that.
Yep, agreed.
Thank you. Okay, so it's 11:32, and I know that I've got some interest here for some questions. One question that was emailed in, and I don't know that Diane or Jamie can address this one, but I believe we have Dave Miller and Tom Petzold on the call. One of the questions that we received was, we started this process previous to the pandemic. Where is that process now, knowing that we believe that we had the amount of signatures required, and we're moving forward, and then it was stopped? Dave or Tom, do either of you want to kind of update us on that piece of it?
Tom, I can do it if you. I'll go first, and then Tom can fill in any gaps. So these ladies, we really appreciate you being here with us because it really helps to understand how the program works and to have your experiences. So thank you for your time. We worked with the Department of Ag, and Tom and I were the point people for the collaborative. And we went through the steps as outlined in the PA 232 Act. We had a petition approved by Department of Ag that we then began circulating among growers for signatures. Tom took care of collecting signatures up north. I collected signatures in the south. And we had a number of signatures that was deemed adequate by MDARD to move the process forward. And the next step would be to establish the committee, develop a draft program, as Jamie said, and then have meetings and get feedback, input, have discussions. And after those, decide if it's worth going forward with a referendum, because the collaborative would have had to pay for the referendum. And at that time, Gordon Wink, who was MDARD director, thought that it would cost between $2,000 and $3,000, given the number of growers that we had to send ballots to. So we were at the point to have the meetings. That was going into early 2020, and COVID shut everything down. And so the signatures had a life of 12 months. NDARD gave us a break and said that we could have 18 months, but it was still not possible to pull things back together and get on track. During that time, my term as president for the collaborative ended, and Tom and I were no longer on the research committee, and we just kind of lost momentum, and the project went off the tracks. The time frame came to an end, and the signatures we collected expired.
That's why we're here today, trying to kind of reignite that process and provide a foundation so that all of us that may have outstanding questions on how the process works, or opinions on why it does or why it doesn't, can certainly start from the same base. So thank you. Tom, is there anything else that you wanted to add to that?
Just to provide some context, Dave covered the details, but I think it's valuable to know that the growers in the north jumped on board. I mean, almost without hesitation and without us having to go into great detail. We did spend time explaining our rationale and the future, the potential organization and how money might be used. But in the South, there was great resistance, which Dave Miller dealt with face-to-face with meetings and explanations and everything else. But after 2 years and before the pandemic, the South was making clear changes in their attitudes, and we were picking up lots of names. And we had, I think, as Dave said, MDARD had recognized that we had reached enough signatures to move to the next level, which would be the informational meetings throughout the state, which would lead up to the actual referendum itself.
Thank you. So moving on to our next question, I have Isabella Babinska from the Petoskey area. Has a question. Isabella, do you want to ask a question, or would you like me to read it? Or I'll go ahead and read it. What is the process, and who is responsible for documenting the number of acreage of growers? And is that something the state does? So basically, you know, how do you make sure people are staying honest?
Well, it's kind of on the honor system, but my assessments come in from the fresh packers. So I get my assessments primarily from the fresh packers and from the processors. So if you deliver to Michigan Freeze Pack, or you deliver to Arbor, or you deliver to Griner Farms, they take the assessment out of the check that they give you when they pay you, and then they remit it to me. I do have some growers who sell direct to retail, and they're responsible for paying that to us. I know I've got people out there that are growing that aren't paying. And I've found a few of them, through, I had my first experience, I had a co-op over in the Ann Arbor area want to work with us on marketing, and talked to them. And I said, well, who are you getting your asparagus from? Nobody on my list. So I reached out to that person, and they paid, and they've been paying, and I've been sharing information. So you but the bulk of it can come from collecting it from the processors and the packers, if they're delivering that way.
It's the same for us. We have the shippers and processors collect the majority of it. And then at the end of the season, we do an annual kind of cleanup where direct farm sales and different things pay once a year. So, and I would say that is maybe 4% of what we collect. So it's not a huge amount. And yeah, it's an honor system.
Because this is the way my mind thinks. Another concern that I'm certainly sensitive to is that, we've talked about being able to open new doors for funding for grants and what you have at the legislature. But another pushback I've certainly witnessed is that based on the acreage that's available for wine grapes, and then that's intentionally to be separate from juice grapes. Based on the acreage of wine grapes, the assessment would either have to be high, or the understanding that this amount it basically comes out for Michigan wine grapes. And this is quick math. We're looking at about $100,000. So we're actually basically making enough to put some sort of administrator in a role to navigate the program for the group. But then what? We wouldn't have any money to do anything after that. So what would you say to that?
I think carrots would be a good example of that. My predecessor ran carrots, onions, and asparagus. Greg Bird runs the Michigan Veg Council, which is not a 232, but he runs the Onion Committee, which onions and carrots are the smallest. I bring in carrots $20,000 worth of revenue every year. So we have a contract with carrots, and I do the legwork for them. So it's a pretty low cost. So you could partner or find someone to manage your program that would, like, I keep track of my time, and it's basically cost. That's all because I've got a lot of overlap between carrots and asparagus. So it benefits my growers, all of my growers, if we do that. And then that leaves money for us to that bank account I talked about. So we built up to $90,000. That lets us apply for specialty crop block grants, which are you have to pay Michigan State first, and then you get reimbursed. So that bank account allows that to happen. Then our little bit of money, the 20,000, some of that we use for research grants. So we pay $5,000 a year to MSU for the aster leaf, or the aster yellow leafhopper thing. And then we just had one of our researchers get a green grant on heavy metals, and we're putting $7,000 a year to him. And so it's a little bit, but I think that partnership is really important. If you can find somebody that already has the apparatus and you're just a piece of it, and they keep track of how much time or however you decide to work on it. But onions works the same way. And so there's models out there.
Yeah, I would also say the Michigan Tree Fruit Commission, they were formed with the idea of never having a director. They were utilizing the cherry and the apple committees to do the legwork. So Michigan Apple Committee took over all the financial work, and we continue to do that to this day. We did hire a part-time kind of help with, policy and different things like that. But it's a very small amount. I want to say $25,000 a year, maybe. And then Michigan Apple Committee, we do all the accounting work because it does include apples. We do it for free. So yeah, so partnering is a great way to, being able to afford to be able to do that.
Brian, can I throw a comment out too? You mentioned juice grapes. The juice grape acreage in Michigan is probably at least double, maybe triple what the wine grape acreage is. And I'm sure the tonnage is much greater too, but the value is not as great per ton. And I know in New York, they tried to do a checkout program like this, which included juice grapes and wine grapes, and it's been shot down every time by juice grape growers. So their needs are different enough from the wine grape industry. Of course, we share needs with pests, pest control and environmental impact and things like that. But just the nature of what we're trying to do with our end product is different enough. I think it would be a mistake to try to include juice grapes just to try to get that revenue, because I don't think we'll ever get those guys on board.
Hey, I would agree with that. I just want to point out Michigan Tree Fruit Commission again. You know, if the cherry industry say didn't want to continue with that, the apple industry can vote it in. Quite frankly, because we have the volume of growers. So it can kind of trap you into something, maybe, you know, into a program that maybe you wouldn't want to be a part of. So if you don't have like-minded, you know, needs and everything, luckily that hasn't happened. Most cherry growers grow apples, so it kind of has worked out fine for us, but I could see where that could be an issue if an industry wanted out. So if you don't have like issues and you don't think you're going to be able to be in it together in the long run, yeah, I wouldn't recommend doing that.
Okay, so I think we are at the end of the points that I have. Are there any other questions from the audience that we might be able to ask Diane or Jamie?
I have another question, Brian.
Okay.
So it sounds like you don't have to spend all of the funds that you collect every year. Is that correct?
That is correct. MDR does have limits as oversight on you, how much you can keep in reserve. Usually it's a year of operating, which, trust me, does come in handy when you have something like 2012 when we lost 97% of our crop. So it is important to try to have some sort of cush there, a reserve, so to speak, but there are limits on that. Yes. Jamie, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I don't know if there are limits, because I know my bank account's about 4 times what my annual operating budget is. But again, it took John a decade to build that. So we've never been told that we've got too much. Now, Diane, you have a lot more money than we do.
Maybe we had too much. Yeah, we had with our audit oversight with Jeff at MDARD, he had indicated a couple times on to make sure that our reserve was kept at that operating level. So, but yeah, we do probably collect a lot more annually than asparagus. Yeah.
Yeah, Brian.
Yeah, Tom.
I'd like to emphasize and endorse what Dave had said earlier about the value of Diane and Jamie's input today. We started off with the Tree Fruit Commission and had unbelievable support, but they are so big, so incredibly big, that for our purposes, a lot of times it's very difficult for us to translate the benefits of such a large operation to our growers' interest. And what we're hearing today is exactly the type of questions that our growers have asked repeatedly. And we've given answers hoping that we were correct. And I think Dave would agree, we're being validated. It is very, very useful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I do think, you know, if there's ever an opportunity, if any growers or whatever wanted to speak with other growers that are in a program already, I know growers, they're very welcoming, and especially on the apple side, they're always willing to talk about the benefits. And I know that if any grower wanted to reach out to a board member of mine, you know, just feel free to reach out and I can put you in contact with them.
Yep, same for me. I'd say another benefit, although I don't know, and maybe there's a correlation for wine grapes, but the other thing that we do is work with USDA on purchases for school lunch, well, and feeding programs. Probably not asparagus for school lunch, but apples. But if there are things like that at the federal level, in trade shows, I know Diane and I work together. We've exhibited together at the International Fresh Produce Association show. I'm going to the National Restaurant Show. And so it's an opportunity to have funds that I'm not going to National Restaurant to plug any one shipper. I'm there for Michigan asparagus. And then if you're a buyer and you're interested, well, I'll give you the paper that tells you who you can reach out to get product. So there are those like trade show opportunities. And then, you know, if there are, I don't know if anybody, probably not, that buys wine, but something like that where you would have, again, a leverage opportunity.
I don't know. I'm seeing some opportunity here for bonus buys of wine. I'm not sure who could benefit from those, not school children, of course, but there's some adults that probably could.
Yes.
Any further questions for our guests? Okay. Well, I think this has been very educational. We appreciate the time that Diane and Jamie have dedicated to us, and certainly I get the feeling that, especially working with both of them for this particular project, that they are open books. And if you have any questions, that feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to make that connection for you. And this is a process that we're going through as an emerging industry for Michigan wine. And essentially all we're trying to do is fill three coffers: research, education, and marketing, to make sure that we're competitive as a specialty crop and trying to move our industry forward in a big industry called wine. So,
you know, Brian, that does one other leverage opportunity. I don't know if you guys, Michigan State, they have their funding issues. And so like we just lost our weed researcher, and they call them startup packages. But apparently to lure new talent to the university, they need labs, they need money for their staff before they can go out and get grants. And so again, if you're an organization, you know, I can't put up a ton, but I can put up a little bit to get the researchers that we need. So that's another way where pooling the growers' money helps you get the kind of research talent that you might need for whatever problems that you have.
Yeah, I can think of at least 4 positions that probably wouldn't have been filled very quickly by Michigan State, but did because we had funds that we could put towards those startup packages and hiring those individuals. So that does give you some power, and it gives you a seat again at that table. So definitely.
Yeah, I think that's a very important theme, is being able to have a voice at the legislature. Okay, so thanks for everyone joining us. Thank you very much, Jamie and Diane, for joining us. And again, if you have any further questions, or if anyone that's on the call develops some more questions as you continue to digest the information we learned here today, please reach out. I know Tom and Dave are certainly educated on this process as well. So those are resources, but certainly Diane and Jamie are going to show us that they are very valuable resources as we try to move through this process. So thanks again, all of you. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you. Bye.